My name is Kenneth Alper. I'm an Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Neurology at New York University School of Medicine. Came here to present a study, a follow-up study, an observational follow-up study on 30 patients treated with Ibogaine in Mexico for opioid dependence with severe physical dependence. What we found and what we expected to find and what's been widely reported is that Ibogaine was quite effective in opioid detoxification, in alleviating the physical dependence on opiates. We found also that there were decreases in the patients who remained available for follow-up, that there were decreases in drug use that were most evident at 1 month, which is when you see the greatest improvement with Ibogaine, but they were sustained across a 12-month time period. Ibogaine is a naturally occurring compound. It's called an alkaloid. This is a class of naturally occurring compounds. It's isolated from the root of a bark, the Terbinanthe iboga shrub that grows in West Central Africa. In West Central Africa, the bark of the Terbinanthe iboga plant is iboga. It is ingested as a religious sacrament in the Bwiti religion, which is the indigenous context of use in Africa. Psychedelics has been sort of a taboo topic. It was associated with the counterculture in the 60s. What I think a lot of people don't remember is that in the 50s and 60s, prior to it become a taboo topic and overly sensationalized, that there was evidence that these compounds could be useful for addictions. And I think that we are now experiencing an increasing movement into the mainstream of work with these compounds designated as psychedelics and for the indication of drug use, of substance use disorders.
My name is Steve Elfrink. I'm from Viroqua, Wisconsin. Very excited to be here in Prague for this Beyond Psychedelics conference. Today I'll be presenting on my experience in an FDA clinical trial for psilocybin. It was a pharmacokinetic study. And it was 3 doses over 3 months where I got to experience what were some of the highest doses ever done for a clinical FDA study. So my experience was pretty intense and kind of showed sometimes what could be the dark side of psychedelics, of going into some of these hell realms, but then coming through those experiences with a positive and what worked out to be my most profound experience in my life. Any of these conferences or any of these times any of us get up there to talk about these experiences, my main goal, and I think the goal of a lot of people here, is to bring awareness to the potential for psychedelics. For my interest is in therapeutic applications, and also the need for our society and for culture for some level of an awakening to what's going on the planet and what we're creating right now for society. Just the level of awareness that can be brought to the acceptance of these medicines, also to destigmatize these medicines as something that can have huge potential for a lot of people from a healing perspective and a deep healing for the planet also.
My name is Paul Austin, and I'm from the Third Wave. I live in Lisbon, Portugal at the moment, but I am from the States originally. So I will be speaking about microdosing, specifically what are the benefits of microdosing, why are people microdosing, and what are the future implications of microdosing. With microdosing, you're typically taking what people consider a sub-perceptual dose. For LSD, that might be 10 to 20 micrograms. For magic mushrooms, that might be 0.2 to 0.4 grams of magic mushrooms. And the idea is to take it about twice a week. So some of the results that we're seeing with microdosing are that people are having less anxiety, and that it just incorporates and integrates more mindfulness into their daily routine, into their weekly routine, into their entire life. And with that sense of mindfulness that comes from a microdosing regimen, people are seeing, some of their symptoms of depression or anxiety, some of their symptoms of ADHD are starting to go away, and they're starting to move towards a place of healing. One important reason why it's important that psychedelics be medicalized from a scientific approach is because it helps with the public to become more comfortable with these substances. So we're seeing that with marijuana right now, how medical marijuana, at least in the United States, is now legal in 25 states, and that is helping to push forward the recreational marijuana movement. So when it comes to psychedelics, the benefits clearly outweigh the risks and the costs, and being able to first medicalize those with scientific research will help the general public to recognize the benefits and then to eventually open up to other dialogues about the possible benefits outside of the medical spectrum and more from a psychospiritual perspective.
My name is Kalinda Iyi. I'll be speaking this afternoon on high-dose psilocybin into the darkness, dealing with the paradigm of the Egyptian or Kemetic underworld in relationship to high-dose hallucinogens. The conference here, I think, is a very, very necessary adjunct to scientific research, personal exploration, and just dealing with how we relate to psychedelics in the world in a responsible manner so that they can go into the public domain as actually a new paradigm of how we look at these type of compounds, not as we have looked at them in the past, but how the new paradigm of the reemergence of psychedelics after 40 years will be part of how we relate to them in a modern time.
My name is Bruno Gonzalez. I come from Mexico City. I am the chair of the board of directors of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, INPUT. I work in Mexico with a youth-led NGO that's called Reverdecer, trying to make visible the impacts of the war on drugs on people who use drugs and in the general society, general population. We brought along myself and other young activists from around the world and around here, Europe. We brought the workshop on broader drug policy reform movement, and we had a session on harm reduction in general. So it's I presented on the harm reduction, full spectrum harm reduction perspective, which tries to expand a little bit the traditional focus on harm reduction based on injected drug use, methadone substitution or opiate substitution treatments, condoms and HIV, and trying to expand it to different practices, to other sorts of use of substances, other means of administration, and trying to include this whole framework of psychedelic, both psychedelic crisis attention, psychedelic therapy, psychedelic research, and obviously kind of like the recreational or more like do-it-yourself use of psychedelics into the broad harm reduction kind of framework or focus. Harm reduction for us in this full spectrum approach, we try to portray it as more than a set of interventions or a series of specific practices or actions, more like a philosophical framework through which to pose or take decisions, to filter the decision-making process, so that every aspect of the action, of the strategy, of the service, of implementing any intervention or whatever, is aligned with this intention, which is basically minimize, reduce, or eliminate entirely any and every risk and harm associated both with the use of the substance, the cultural practices around the substance, which include the production, which include the transportation, the trafficking, and obviously the policies that pretend to regulate the substances or the people who use them. That's why we're trying to bring together all of these different elements of harm reduction into one whole perspective or system, so that any sort of communication, interaction, intervention, both with the people in the ground, our community of people who use drugs, but also in the high-level multilateral organisms like United Nations and stuff, to have the same concrete message which aims to empower the person, which aims to clarify and be honest and break stigma and break taboo around the drug use and the substances themselves, and who tries to bring this kind of leveling approach into the social injustice and the social impact that the war on drugs is having.
My name is Levente Moro. I'm a researcher in Finland, but I'm based in Hungary now, and I operate a psychedelic crisis intervention team with which we go to festivals and parties to reduce harm. Psychedelic subculture is really embedded in the musical subculture, and these parties and festivals are really important events of initiation for people, the members of the community. So it's very important that they are supported in their efforts to build up a community or like a better world, and we take part in this process by helping them through their possibly difficult experiences and just facilitating their inner growth. There are sometimes difficult experiences for people at festivals and parties related to psychoactive substances. This is not an intentional bad thing, but they just get into circumstances that they can't really handle the experience by themselves. So we don't like to call it a bad trip. It's more like a difficult experience with different phases, and we are not talking down these people from having this experience. We are just talking through.
My name is Julia Järvenpää and I'm from Finland, and I'm part of the harm reduction team in Finland. We basically do the same work as Levente's team does in Hungary and in other countries as well. Well, by harm reduction we mean that even though psychedelics are quite safe to use, they don't possess many risks, but it is possible to have a difficult experience which can lead to confusion or fear, anxiety, and even though this is quite rare, I think Levente earlier said it's about 1% of the people who come to these festivals. So by being there, listening to them, and just being there when they are going through the experience, we can make them feel safer, so they won't be afraid of what is coming up, and sometimes they also benefit from the experience that first seemed to be a difficult one. And we've received a lot of thanks from the people who have our visitors who've been to our safe space tent.
My name is Stefana Bosse. I work with the Psychedelic Society UK. In fact, I have the very glorious title of Head of Experience at the Psychedelic Society. The Psychedelic Society UK was the first national psychedelic society, and our activities are not so much focused on the traditional letter writing, political campaigning. We have done some political events in the activist types of things in the past, but mostly what we're focusing on is really creating the psychedelic community. So we run Bring and Share Psychedelic suppers where we explore different themes connected to psychedelic culture. We do psychedelic yoga, psychedelic dance, rhythms. We hold big events, for example, next upcoming one on the legalization and regulation of psychedelics. So it's a lot of community growing, awareness raising, and then our centerpiece as the society are the psychedelic experience weekends, which we hold in the Netherlands. And what's very unique about them is that psilocybin truffles are legal in the Netherlands, so we are publicly advertising these weekends. We strongly believe from our own experience that when used safely, psychedelics are an amazing transformative tools to awaken to the fundamental unity of all things, and they can both provide tremendous personal, individual psychological healing, as well as your openness, empathy to other people, care for the planet. They are absolutely extraordinary, one-of-a-kind tools that should be widely that should be available to everyone when used in a careful manner.
My name's Simon Green and I'm a Wachumero. I'm from Australia. I work in the context of a manner of traditional healing or relationship to traditional healing using traditional methods from various schools. I say Wachumero. My principal plant of relationship is Wachuma, which is a visionary cactus from the Andes. I prefer to use the term visionary plants rather than psychedelic, partially because of negative connotation, but partially because psychedelic suggests somehow a manufactured process, whereas my experience over many years has been that the insights gained and the visions have a very direct correlation with the unintoxicated state, and I've seen tremendous healing capacity or tremendous healing events affected when used in a correct context, when used in a ritual setting. These plants, particularly Wachuma and Ayahuasca, is my experience. I treat drug addicts. I have had success with complex PTSDs. I work with military veterans, Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've had tremendous success in that regard. Success that hasn't been met in traditional psychiatry and also for organic conditions that prove resistant to other forms of treatment, pharmacological treatment usually. I spoke this weekend about the lack of capacity to address everything of the psychedelic realm with contemporary materialist science. I think there's a tremendous number of exceptional scientists here this weekend, and they are providing extraordinarily well-researched data that backs up my own understandings. But I think ultimately some of the phenomena which occur in those, particularly again a specialty of relationship with the plant-based medicines, I think that some of that phenomena cannot be explained in the traditional materialist science, and I think we need to broaden our understanding of sciences to include indigenous sciences and traditional knowledges, because there's a tremendous amount which we're discovering in ecological sciences. We're discovering in, for example, in Australia, we're discovering a lot of cultural story cultural history from Indigenous populations in Australia that was dismissed by the colonialists as myth has in recent years been progressively understood to be actually a historical record. And so we're now starting to take more seriously Indigenous sciences of ecology. The sciences need to expand their boundaries or look through different lenses, and I think the psychedelics offer an opportunity for that.
My name's Danny Nemu, and I'm here in Prague at the conference, and I'm a Daimista, but I wasn't talking about Daimi here, I was talking about psychedelics or psychoactive substances in the Bible. Talking about all the different combinations, different preparations of incenses and also oils that are used in the Bible, and they get quite complicated. For example, the incense has 16 different ingredients, and about 12 or 13 of those are psychoactive. You've got frankincense, which works on the GABA system, it's a tranquilizer. You have myrrh, which is also a tranquilizer. You have spikenard, which boosts serotonin and GABA. You've got a whole load of different things. You've also got the shemen hamishcha, which is the name of the oil which was used to anoint priests. In order that they could minister, they could do the job of a priest, they had to be anointed with an oil first. And so did the kings. So we get this word Mashiach in Hebrew, Messias in Portuguese, Messiah. The combination of myrrh and cassia and cinnamon works a little bit like how ayahuasca works, in that there's a chemical which is called methyl shavicol, and that is broken down by your body's enzymes, the same way DMT is broken down by your body's enzymes. This was documented by Herodotus in about 5th century BC, 5 centuries before Christ.
I'm Melissa Bone, and I'm an academic and lecturer at the University of Leicester in the UK. And I'm here at Beyond Psychedelics presenting a paper on cannabis social clubs and how activists in the UK could help to legitimise the model and get it taken seriously. And I think events like this are so important because they bring together researchers, activists, people from all walks of life, and they can really help us get a more thorough, holistic idea of what we should do when we're going about how to regulate psychedelics. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Leicester, my master's there as well, and I did my PhD at the University of Manchester, which looks at how a human rights perspective can change the way that we think about drug control. My previous research looks at the religious rights of Rastafarians to use cannabis and on the medical rights of cannabis users to consume cannabis as well. But I think that there's a lot that we can transfer from how we regulate other substances like cannabis and that we can apply to psychedelic policies and developing psychedelic policies. I think there's a lot we can learn as well from how different states and different countries have actually regulated cannabis and how activists have built their movement from the bottom up as well, which is what I'm looking at with cannabis social clubs. And I think there are ways that we can transfer that to developing psychedelic policies in the future as well. I think science is increasingly showing that cannabis can be used as a medicine. It's got medicinal effects. I think the general public are starting to come around to that idea, crucially, and I think by changing the public's attitudes on substances like that, we can then start to alleviate the stigma around other illicit substances, such as psychedelics, and see the kind of efficacy and the effectiveness and how they can be beneficial for society as well.
I'm Roland Griffiths. I'm a professor in the departments of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And I've come to this conference at Prague to meet colleagues and to discuss some of our research that we've been doing over the last 15 years with the classic hallucinogen psilocybin in humans. This work has shown that under appropriate setting conditions, when a high dose of psilocybin is administered to someone who's been carefully screened and selected and prepared, then a great majority of people have these deeply personally meaningful experiences, so-called mystical experiences, that are profoundly interesting to them at the immediate time, but even months afterwards, they attribute to these experiences remarkable changes in spiritual well-being, life satisfaction, generally increased sense of spirituality and altruism. And so we've done systematic investigations of this phenomena in healthy volunteers, in beginning meditators, in long-term meditators, and in some patient populations, namely cancer patients who have anxiety or depression secondary to a life-threatening cancer diagnosis. I think science has a very important role to play in understanding psychedelics. Now that we know that we can administer these drugs safely and that under high probability we can occasion deeply meaningful experiences that aren't dangerous, aren't difficult experiences, we can now do prospective studies. And so there's a lot of very interesting neuroimaging work going, because what we want to look at is the neurophysiological underpinnings of these experiences. Ultimately, this is a project of understanding the very nature of conscious experience itself. And psychedelics are provide a unique experience or window into the nature of mind and the nature of self.
My name is Friederike Meckel Fischer. I'm a medical doctor and a psychotherapist. I'm born in Germany, studied in Germany, and now I'm living since 1994 in Switzerland. I have been working as a psychotherapist. Because of my very own fate, I'm a typically after the war born person, directly after the war. I started to search for the reasons that I was not functioning well, sort of depressed, sort of dissociated. And it's a very long story, like an odyssey to find a therapy that would finally lead me to myself. And by this journey of self-discovery, I discovered the psychedelics. So I did this work nearly, not quite, but almost 10 years using MDMA, LSD, 2CB and psilocybin, and sometimes we had someone come in to do the ayahuasca with us. I decided to write my knowledge down. All of a sudden I could see all the things that I had done. Then I started to write everything down. And then I got invited to conferences, and now I find myself under the grace of betrayal. You know, I wrote a book, Therapy with Substance, and I go and talk about the work we have done. I do my talks so that people know that we have done psycholytic therapy in a controlled setting, with very good results and very careful dosages, and so that's about my story. And I'm really very grateful to my fate, to the things that are bigger than I, that I after all this I've gone through from the very beginning to the disastrous end. It has gone on for me well, and I thank God and my lawyer and my judge and all the people that are so kind to me.
My name is Kraehenmann. I am a psychiatrist from Zurich in Switzerland, and I'm working at the Psychiatric University Hospital of Zurich in Switzerland, Zurich. And actually that's an institution which has been famous for the psychiatrist and the psychoanalysis actually. As you know, maybe Bleuler, Jung and Freud, they met together there, and a lot of ideas stem from this hospital. So that's what fascinated me to start working at that hospital, and having in mind these ideas of psychodynamic therapy and what's the soul, what's the mind, how does that work, and how can we use that knowledge to improve the lives of the patients. About 5 years ago I met Franz Vollenweider. Franz is the leader of the psychiatric research unit there, and he has been doing research on psychedelic drugs for about 20 to 30 years now, and he has done a lot of neuroimaging studies and electrophysiology, looking into the brain. How does it work during psychedelic substances like psilocybin, LSD and MDMA. So that was fascinating to see the output of that research, which showed that these substances profoundly alter the state of consciousness which you are in. So having that in mind, you can really try to think what happens if we give such substances to patients who suffer from psychological problems, for example. For example, at the moment we are planning to do a study in depressed patients, and there is a lot of evidence which shows that depressed patients, they get better if they have an experience which helps them to overcome some psychological issues. And for example, they're in a state where they have visions and where they are thinking about new perspectives, about changing, about how can they change their lives and do differently, and how can they improve their relationships and so on. So they feel reborn, in some to say. So the same thing happened in your country, in Brazil, with the amazing research on ayahuasca, and I think I'm very interested to coordinate studies together with Brazilian researchers. You have done an amazing job to do research on ayahuasca, and I think these are all substances which come from nature, which are really helpful in some ways if we can really adapt to clinical issues. And so that's the main motivation for me to continue this amazing, interesting research.
My name is David Kostanic. I'm based in Switzerland. I have a PhD in biophysics, and my last professional experience was a startup company in the medical technology sector. I came here to the Congress to explore a new idea for a new kind of social enterprise to develop psychedelic therapy for patients suffering from stress-related mood disorders. And we drafted a proposition paper, exposed it to the community, and I'm harnessing feedback to see how we could make an efficient therapy based on psychedelics in a legal context, respecting all regulatory requirements to perform such studies and administer therapies. I very much like the concept that Kenneth Tupper framed of a cognitive tool. And a tool, you can use it for a good or a bad purpose. So if you do it in the right setting with the right therapist and the right community surrounding this and right preparation and integration, this can be a highly beneficial tool. And scientific studies show that. We've seen several talks here, for instance, by Professor Griffiths from Johns Hopkins, Professor FULLHD from Zurich, that these tools can really be efficient for treating mood disorders and maybe even other disorders. I think there is a reconsideration that is absolutely necessary on the mainstream society scene for these tools, how we use them. Why do we want to hide tools that can be efficient?
Here in this conference in Prague, I presented something about imagery in the visions, the use of imagery in general by indigenous groups. One thing that I realized is that, for instance, when, let's say, the Tucano, they give the yaje or capi to the kids 13, 14 years old. They are in this state of consciousness, and then the older shaman is reciting the spiritual geography, the mythology of the tribe. So the kids are listening to these songs, their songs, under the effects of capi. They are dancing, and they are being educated in the cultural norms of the society. They are learning the myths, but they are learning in such a way that they are able to see the myths for themselves. They are able to really see, in front of them, because in this state of mind, the mind will create these images. You say tree and then a tree appears. You say, the river and then you see the river. There is a canoe coming down, and there is a big serpent coming down up the river. You see the serpent coming up the river. And so I noticed that from the literature, but then when I was doing fieldwork many years ago in the 90s, with the UDV, Unión de Vegetal, and I participated in several of the ceremonies of the UDV, and then they have something similar. In certain festivities, they take the vegetal, and then they listen to the stories by José Gabriel da Costa. And in that state of mind, when you are hearing, let's say, the Historia da Huasca, the story of how, it is that we have Huasca here, and then you hear the story of Cayano, and then, first of the King Solomon, and the Huasca, and the Chihuahua. You hear it in this state of mind, and then it is like unfolding in front of you. So they are using, in a way, the same technique. And it's very interesting that the UDV do not want to have that written down, but it is transmitted orally, as it is among the indigenous people.
My name is Peter Jarek and I'm from Germany. I'm studying psychology right now. I'm doing my master. Why I'm going to this kind of congress is to get informed about psychedelics and more or less getting the scary thing, hey, LSD is dangerous and all these things, to get this out of everybody's head. Psychedelics are a good thing and they are very good for people, and they are especially good for psychotherapy, and that's why I came here, to get informed and get new stuff. Well, the most important thing is, I think, the studies that I work in, they have such a big effect, really, that I've read a lot of studies in my bachelor and my master, and there was always just about an effect about 1.0%, 1.2% or something like that. And if you see the effects of psychedelics, like Rick Doblin yesterday said, there were 66% of the people didn't have PTBS anymore, or more or less were not recognized as having PTBS, and these are really effects that are enormous. Really, that's not a normal effect for a study. That's really an enormous effect, and that's how it's going on. And I think that's what will be different for the psychotherapy, and especially for the pharma industry. They are trying to get all the patents on this LSD and MDMA stuff, but they don't want to sell the drug at all, the medicament. They don't want to sell it, but they want the patent. That's a very interesting thing.
I'm Ryan Abood. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm here in beautiful Prague for this conference. I'm going into psychiatry. I'm a medical student at Michigan State right now, and man, I'm just so glad to be here. So many good people here, and hopefully one day I would love to do therapy and work with people, work with psychedelics, and work with bring up the whole community. The climate in medicine in the United States right now I think it's changing. Definitely, like certain professors, certain researchers are very open and interested in this promising field. I mean, these are the most potent therapeutic tools that we have, and research needs to be done, and we need controlled studies, and it's happening. I mean, all these people maps. There's a lot of promising research happening, and people are opening up. The 60s and the 50s and the counterculture brought this huge wave of research and maybe got out of hand, and now we're bringing it back into a place of a little more compassion, and we're a little more ready. In Detroit especially, there's a lot of homelessness, a lot of addiction, and we don't have the proper social resources to help lift these people up. We need our politicians, the governors, the community members to come together and create a sustainable, grassroots network of people who can create this, new society. And and therapy is the gateway to bring this sustainable future to the world.
I'm Michael Winkleman, and I'm retired for the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University, and now live in the Central Highlands of Brazil, where I'm enjoying a permaculture lifestyle. My career had been focused on the study of shamanism and other religious practices, trying on one hand to determine what were universal principles of shamanic and religious behavior, and on the other hand trying to understand what the biological basis for those behaviors was. And we find these practices for altering consciousness, for changing experience of the world, often producing a kind of out-of-body experience. So I was trying to understand, how is it that things such as drumming and chanting and the use of hallucinogenic plants contribute to the production of these extraordinary experiences, and what's adaptive about them? How is it that engaging in these kinds of alterations of consciousness produce benefits for people? And what I come to understand is that a variety of different ways of altering consciousness really produce enhanced access to the lower areas of the brain. In essence, putting us back in touch with our animal brain and our animal mind. And so many aspects of shamanism can be understood in terms of how it is that it gives us access to those parts of consciousness that have been repressed by the brain, but which acquire an ascendancy, a manifestation in consciousness because of the changes in the brain that occur during alterations of consciousness. How is it that these alterations of consciousness, and in particular the changes produced in the brain by the psychedelic plants, give us a new way of seeing and understanding the world? In essence, what I'm trying to talk about is what we can call a neuroepistemology. How is it that the chemicals in our brain affect the way that we know the world? And what we understand about the psychedelics is that they have a range of effects upon the brain, beginning with, for instance, the stimulation of the serotonergic system, which is the most important neuromodulatory system in the brain, and is responsible for integrating and controlling a wide range of brain processes. Well, psychedelics influence the brain in a number of ways, beginning with its effects upon the serotonin system, and stimulating the most important neuromodulatory system of the brain. Serotonin enhances and controls a lot of different brain areas. Some of these are disrupted by the psychedelics, which then permit the emergence of other aspects of the brain's neurotransmitter systems. For instance, freeing the dopamine system and its stimulation of visions and pleasant feelings. We've also come to recognize in recent years that there's some very important networks of the brain, the default mode network, that sort of gives us our habitual ways of thinking. And the psychedelics interrupt that default mode network and integrate other aspects of the brain, enabling us to have a deeper connection among parts of the brain that normally aren't communicating with each other. I think that this is why the psychedelics are so significant, because they allow for the integration and the enhanced access to information that's not normally available. So when we look at the psychedelics as a neuroepistemological tool, it changes how we perceive the world in important ways. It leads to a dissolution of our ordinary sense of self, our ordinary ways of looking at the world. It enhances our access to the deep information systems of the brain, where perception and sensations are normally screened out but now become very important. And it does so in ways that integrates these different kinds of information within a visual system that's really a symbol system, much like the visions that we have in dreams. But these are a way of integrating complex forms of information into very condensed kinds of information bits and images. And so what we see in psychedelics is a new kind of way of seeing the world that now allows us to feel this enhanced connection with all of the universe, with all of the earth, and gives us a better understanding of our role here on the planet. It's really great to be here in the Czech Republic. We really can put the origins of psychedelic therapy here in the Czech Republic with the work of Stanislav Grof almost 50 years ago. And what we now see is a renaissance, a renovation of the understanding of the importance of psychedelics, and an ability to now apply these in ways that enhance a variety of different kinds of therapeutic options for people. One of the other significant issues addressed here at the conference is the political changes that need to be made in order to provide greater access to these important medicines. We've been deprived of access to some of nature's most important medicines, our most important spiritual tools, because of ill-conceived war on drugs. And we need to end this war on humanity, war on consciousness, war on our sacred traditions, and enable people to re-experience their spirituality, connection with nature and the universe that these plants provide.
When I started my research 20 years ago, there was indifference, if not some overt negative reactions to this kind of research. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I think it has completely changed. Society is becoming more open to what these substances might offer, and the original stigma that we were living with in the past decades is gradually disappearing, and it's being substituted for evidence-based data. So I think the society at large, if you can show them in an understandable and manner and following adequate methodology, that these substances in certain specific cases could be used as medicines, they will be ready to try this and accept it in the end.